So our topic today is professional passion, and we're here with Josh Miles of Miles Design, and recently the author of Bold Brand, just released. And Josh, today you're here to talk about sort of this project of passion, this work of art that you've been on for. How long has it been since you started the book process?
Well, thanks, Aaron. It's been officially just under a year. Unofficially, much longer than that, closer to 2.5.
I imagine there's some relief in being complete with it. Do you still love it?
Yeah, it's kind of wild to see that first proof copy come in the mail, and you pull the thing out of the UPS, and it's this thing that you've been looking at in Microsoft Word for the past 11 months is suddenly a real book, and it's got a physical presence to it, and that's pretty crazy.
It's very exciting. What started this process? What had you so curious or committed or excited that you wanted to sit down and write a book?
It was probably that same element of crazy somewhere about here in my brain that said I should start a business. But, maybe 3 years ago, I thought, you know what, I would really like to write a book. And I started trying to write a book about that time. So I started jotting down ideas and started jotting down titles. And it turns out it's a lot of work, not really being committed to the idea, but just sort of doodling around and, thinking up ideas. That was pretty exhausting.
I can imagine. Any in particular that didn't make it you'd want to share?
um, yeah, so I guess starting out that, the book is called Bold Brand, and it really focuses on business to business and professional service firms, with the premise of every book out there on branding is about B2C. It's about, Nike and Apple and Amazon and Target and Starbucks. And every example are these great, super funded retail brands. And nobody ever talks about how the B2B professional service firm can develop a brand too. So initially the concept was far, far, far less targeted. It was just like, oh, I should write a branding book. And as you can imagine, that sort of just went on for a while and went all over the place.
Just succinctly wrap up that whole industry, would you?
Right, right. Yeah, initially it was called The Brand Tree, and that didn't have quite as much sizzle to it. But the
Understood.
concept of, building a brand starts at the roots and sort of builds to the trunk, and things like campaigns and day-to-day activities become the leaves that can, sort of fall off, and you do those again next week or next month. I think that concept was okay, but, that made for about 3 pages in the eventual book as opposed to the whole book itself.
Excellent. What what if you had to summarize this book? What would be one of the main lessons? What would be the moral of the story that we could expect going into it?
I think the moral of the story is that the things that professional services firms have done for the last, 30 years, being put an ad in the yellow pages, go to a networking event, sponsor a little league team,
Uh-huh.
attend a rubber chicken dinner, network at general meetings, those things are all well and good, and those are all great for building a relationship, but people are searching for more than just a general networking outlet to market their brand. These professional services brands can actually build a following and position themselves uniquely in the marketplace by doing some of the same things that these big retail brands do.
Interesting. What do you think is the biggest hurdle or challenge that a professional service has to overcome in this brand adventure?
I think it's a positioning problem, and I think it's an identity problem. So it's easy to say, well, everybody does this, so that's the way I'm supposed to do it. Every
Mm,
website looks like this, so this is the way my website is supposed to look. All of the companies in this space have bad photography of our work. We'll send a project manager out with his digital camera, and that's good enough.
yeah.
So I think it's the way that things used to be done is the biggest hurdle.
Interesting. It's the challenge is who am I and where am I?
Right.
Which is, what's interesting is in that vein, I imagine best practices are very similar to the lowest common denominator. If everybody's copying everybody else, and if the first person's not doing it well, then you get a bunch of mediocre, lukewarm identities.
Right. Or then you have the opposite problem in some industries. You don't see this as much in professional services, but when everything is, bold and underlined and italicized and red and the photos are big and the button is big, suddenly nothing's important. So, those are the two extremes of everything's bland and the industry's bland, so I'll just be bland too, or everything's loud, so we need to be loud.
Yes.
It's a matter of determining what you want the hierarchy of your message and your brand to be and how to stand out uniquely.
And how to encourage action, behavior, engagement.
Yeah.
That's a big piece that I think some design firms don't think of the psychology of interaction, but that's something that Miles Design, obviously you and your team, I've heard from you for quite a while now, is that we're doing this to serve a purpose, not just to be pretty.
Right.
I think that's reflective in a lot of the work you've done, and I imagine that the book will reflect some of that as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
What so how has this passion changed you in the way that you work? Have you developed any new skills, any new positions? What's different about you on the other side of this project?
Officially the book will be shipping in the next week or two. So I'm in that awkward point where people are high-fiving and saying, "Oh, it's done. Aren't you glad that it's done? It's done. It's done." And really the marketing and the continuing to talk about the book and making sure people know about it, that's really just getting started. So for me, the project is a reminder of, it's the sample personal project of how are we going to market this one thing for us. And it really, it's easy to spend other people's money, and it's easy to give recommendations to other people about what they should do in various media. But it's a lot tougher when it's real, when it's yours, when it's, when it affects what's at home. So it's been a really interesting project from that standpoint to continue to market and think about how we're going to use this book moving forward.
Interesting. Yeah. And also it's kind of coinciding with some speaking engagements, and was there any ulterior motive to producing the book, or was it mostly just a mind baby that you had to get out?
Well, I think it sort of serves both purposes. I mean, one, yes, I definitely had this passion of I wanted to write a book. But ultimately, I think when anybody writes a book in a professional sense, there's this element of it forces you to think through exactly what you think about a thing. You can't just sort of, babble on, especially if you've got a publisher that's worth anything. They won't allow your editor won't let you get by with just fluffy stuff. So you've really got to distill down your position on something. When you're making a recommendation, you have to make it firm. And so it really forced me to think through some more of my stance and sort of how I feel about different things. So yeah, the short answer is it was both something that I really wanted to do, but ultimately I think it's going to be a good positioning tool for us to say, hey, read our book and here's how we think about this process. Here's how this should work.
Much more impressive than a business card, that's for sure. Although anyone who has seen your business cards has been impressed by them as well. So something you said earlier, and this might be kind of a parallel question that you may want to answer specifically about the book and then larger about your professional life. So you mentioned that crazy part of the brain where we start a business. And I identify with that because if I really knew what I was getting into, I probably wouldn't have done it in the first place.
Right.
So there's a certain amount of ignorance required, but also the conviction that I can't not do this, however it turns out. So the business, which has been growing and successful and continuing to evolve, and the book, which is kind of an outgrowth of that growth. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But these are two elements that have created evidence of you listening to that passion, to that crazy part of your brain. And I'm going to make a correlation. You can tell me if it's wrong, but for us and people like us, we have followed that crazy enough times to know to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that becomes almost a compass in some ways. Not the only one, but a compass, a pulling force. A lot of people haven't taken that first leap. And so they're still on the fence about pursuing a passion.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have for people who have a sense of what that passion might be, but are afraid to pursue it and don't have proof that it's going to pay off?
Well, if you're not stubborn enough to stick with it on your own, it helps to enlist other people. So I did that at two levels. One, I made a crazy bet with my coach at some point. He told me if he didn't get the draft of his book done before me, he was going to get a tattoo right here that said Josh. And I told him if I didn't have my draft done at the same time, that I would teach his business leadership class in drag.
Oh.
So that was not something.
I'm assuming we're talking about C.J. McClanahan.
Yeah, I'm talking about CJ. So we both got our drafts done in July. At that point, he already had a publisher and an editor assigned to the book. So his draft went quickly to print, where mine continued to flutter around and try to determine what I wanted to do with it. The other thing that I did was about that same time, I used to lead a group of brain makers, and I told my particular group that I wasn't going to shave until I got my book done. Well, I did make a few loopholes for myself. I allowed myself to trim the beard, but I haven't been clean shaven since I made that statement. So everybody that sees me and people who know me from, over a year ago from making that statement say, hey, how's the book going? I see you haven't shaved.
Interesting. What a good reinforcer and reminder
Right.
Of getting that in. So the enrolling people, obviously accountability and, setting deadlines, making these public commitments, because I'm guessing your reputation is very positive in the community, and you wouldn't want people to think you don't do what you say you're going to do.
Right.
Anything else that comes that you can recommend for that first step?
Well, the other thing that really made a big difference for me was, like I said, I was writing a book for a year and a half before I really was. And the difference to me was once I had the publisher and editor in place, then it was for real. And prior to that, I was just sort of talking about writing a book.
You were journaling.
So what the big difference was when I finally committed to, I'm going to go find a publisher. And I committed time, and I talked to everybody I knew, and I networked with people, and I said, who do you know who's written books? Who should I talk to? How do I get this figured out? So I ended up talking to maybe a dozen people. And one of those people who I was talking to is Joe Polizzi from the Content Marketing Institute.
Yeah.
And Joe went from giving me tips on how he wrote his book to saying, hey, we're starting a publishing group. Maybe we want to publish your book. And so that led to further conversations, and they became actually really great partners in the book. And that, it's a different model than the traditional publishing model, and they were very big on guiding and leading me through the process and, walking through some of the potential pitfalls. So that was really what I was looking for, was someone who was going to come alongside, because honestly, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah. Well, you haven't done it before.
Right. And now I'm an expert.
Well, because I've read a book. You're a published author. That's a big deal. Would you do it again?
As sick as it may sound at this point, yes, absolutely.
Would you do it any differently?
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of things that I learned along the way. I mean, one, obviously, I wanted to get attached to a publisher right away and not just think about it for a long time. Along those same lines, they really encouraged me to work from an outline, a table of contents, and then, add more and add more and add more to that table of contents. So it's really writing from an outline versus just, journaling in a notebook somewhere and trying to turn that into a book. Is a much more concrete way of developing ideas, and made a lot more sense.
Okay. As we wrap up, is there anything people can know about? Where are you speaking? Where are you showing up? How can we get more Josh?
So I'm going to be in San Francisco this week at the SNPS Build Business Conference. It's this week. I'll be speaking on one of the chapters in the book, which is called Website Emergency. And then shortly thereafter, we're going to be starting a webinar series where we interview different case study subjects from the book and do kind of like we're doing today, just have a conversation and talk about why this case study in particular was effective and why that person did what they did and how that firm kind of worked through their challenges as a professional service. So keep an eye out for that. All of that info will be at boldbrand.com.
Boldbrand.com.
And also there is a free chapter download on the site as well if people would like to get sort of a sample of the book before they dig in further.
Wet their beaks, so to speak.
That's right.
And of course, we can also find more information about you and the firm at milesdesign.com.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else?
I think that's all I've got.
All right, Josh, thank you so much. Congratulations. It's a big deal. I hope you give yourself a little rest and relaxation before promoting it. And I'm very excited to get my copy. And for anybody listening, boldbrand.com. It'll be in the description below. And thank you again, Josh.
Great. Thanks, Aaron.
Take care.
You too. Bye.